In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, we're going to be talking about Sorcerer Multiclassing, and I'm going to be taking you through each of the classes, going through breakpoints with each class with Sorcerer, seeing why you may or may not multiclass at those breakpoints, what makes the most sense. And keep in mind in this video that we're taking it as, that you're predominantly playing as a Sorcerer here, meaning that you have more levels in Sorcerer than some other class, and you're not just dipping a couple levels in Sorcerer. If you're taking a couple levels in Sorcerer, those are covered in the other multiclassing videos where you might do that with another class. So Sorcerer is an interesting class, and it's one that I think is more difficult to multiclass than people would first realize because it's a charisma-based class, and Sorcerers use charisma not unlike Paladins, Warlocks, and Bards to cast their spells. It's easy to think, well, this class multiclasses really well with those classes easily. The issue with Sorcerer is that you need to take levels in Sorcerer to gain access to higher Sorcerer level spells, and unlike Wizard that you only need to dip one level into, and then you can learn spells from scrolls, this isn't an option for Sorcerers. But also because they gain sorcery points as they level up in Sorcerer. As they gain levels in Sorcerer, they gain sorcery points that they can use their meta magic with. And for each level you don't take a Sorcerer, they don't gain a sorcery point. So it's kind of like Monk in the sense that, when monks level up, they gain key, and the less levels you take in Monk, the less key they have. So it can be kind of challenging to multiclass a Sorcerer because you lose a sorcery point every level you don't take Sorcerer. Okay, that being said, let's jump into our first multiclass, Barbarian. This is a tough multiclass in my opinion, not only for the reasons that I just stated, but also because Barbarians have Rage, which increases their melee damage, but they can't use spells while they're raging, and they can't maintain concentration while they're raging, which means that if you're playing a Sorcerer-Barbarian combo, you have to either cast spells and then rage, or rage, finish raging, and then cast spells, or cast a spell on yourself that doesn't require concentration, that will stay on you while you're in combat that you can then go use. And this kind of limits the spell casting of the Sorcerer to a high degree, and just taking one Barbarian level, in my opinion, is probably not a great idea because it's kind of counterintuitive. If you're going to go Barbarian Sorcerer, you're probably much better taking a lot of levels in Barbarian and kind of leaning into the Barbarian playstyle. So then if you're talking about 10 Sorcerer, 2 Barbarian, you gain Reckless Attack and Danger Sense. Reckless Attack's really good for any melee build, but you lose a level 6 spell and you lose a Sorcerer subclass feature. Sorcerer subclass features generally aren't that strong at level 11, in my opinion. The better ones are earlier on, so I don't think you're missing out on much. So, if you're talking about going Sorcerer Barbarian, I think I would at least go 2 levels of Barbarian, 10 Sorc. So then if you're talking 9 Sorcerer, 3 Barbarian, you gain a Barbarian subclass, you gain a Rage Charge, and you lose a level 5 spell slot, a cantrip, and you lose a selection of a type of meta magic. This isn't that bad, in my opinion, as a trade-off, because you typically have the meta magic that you need already at this point for Sorcerer, the best ones in the game, so losing a meta magic isn't too bad. Same with cantrip, you typically have pretty good cantrips at this point anyway. Really, the biggest loss here is the level 5 spell slot, which isn't that bad to pick up a Barbarian subclass and a Rage Charge. So if you're going Sorc Barb, I think 9 and 3 is even better than 10 and 2. Then if you go 8 Sorcerer, 4 Barbarian, you gain a feat, so you'd have 3 feats again, and you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and slots, and you lose a level 4 spell slot. This is kind of a mixed bag, right? Because you might need that feat if you're playing a Barb Sorc multiclass, because it's just kind of a strange combination, and those feats might, bring it together. But losing level 5 spells is rough on a Sorcerer. So it just depends on how committed you want to be to Barbarian, like how much you want to go. At the next level of Barbarian, you gain extra attack, so I think 7 Sorc, 5 Barb is better than going 8 and 4. You also gain fast movement on Barbarian at that level. So I think this is better. Losing out on that feat, going 7 Sorc, 5 Barbarian to gain extra attack is better than 8 and 4 in my opinion. And then at 6 Sorc, 6 Barb, you gain a Barbarian subclass feature and a Rage Charge, but you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells and slots. I think, in my opinion, it really comes down to what you're gaining with that subclass feature. But level 4 spells and slots, losing that is rough on your Sorc. So it's really like, in my opinion, you're probably going 7 and 5 or 6 and 6 if you're really going for like a hybrid build, or you're just going like 9 and 3 and you're staying predominantly a Sorc with a little bit of melee. So next up we have Bard multiclassing with Sorc, and again, these two classes both use Charisma for their spellcasting modifier. So this is not necessarily a bad match because the offensive spells effectiveness is going to be just as strong as if you were playing a pure Bard or pure Sorcerer. However, the more levels you take in Bard, the less higher level spells in Sorcerer you can select. Again, because it's not like Wizard and you can just learn spells from scrolls, you're going to be missing out on some spells by doing that. So you have to really decide what spells you want. So the highest I would probably go is 10 Sorcerer, 2 Bard, and that's because you gain Bard level 1 spells and slots, you gain Bard cantrips, you gain Bardic Inspiration, you gain Song of Rest, you gain Jack of all trades, all of that. That's really, really strong in my opinion, in exchange for losing a feat, which you're going to lose if you go 11 and 1 anyway, and a level 6 spell and subclass feature. And as I mentioned earlier, subclass features aren't that strong here. So I think that's, I don't think you would go 1 level of Bard because you gain a lot at level 2 of Bard. And then at 9 Sorcerer, 3 Bard, you gain Bard level 2 spells and slots, you gain a Bard subclass, that's a huge pickup, and you gain expertise and 2 skills in exchange for losing level 5 spells and a cantrip and meta magic. And as I mentioned before, you don't really need this meta magic and the cantrip that much, so really the biggest loss here is level 5 spells. And it really comes down to what you're gaining from Bard here. There's a lot you can pick up. Bards are pretty front-loaded. And keep in mind that something I didn't mention on Barbarian is that sorcerers, they gain a sorcery point every level of sorcerer they gain, and one of the best ones is Quicken Spell, and that costs 3 sorcery points. So having an even division of that is usually really good. So 9 and 3 is particularly good because you can use it 3 times. So then at 8 Sorcerer 4 Bard, you gain your 3rd feat back, you gain a cantrip, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells, and you lose a level 4 spell slot. That's a tough trade in my opinion. I think you either stop at 9 and 3 or you go further into Bard. At 7 Sorcerer 5 Bard, you gain Bard level 3 spells and slots, you gain Font of Inspiration, which makes it so that you regain your Bardic Inspiration die on short rest. You also gain Improved Bardic Inspiration, which makes your Bardic Inspiration die a d8 instead of a d6, which is great in exchange for losing that 3rd feat and a level 4 spell slot. I think that is a good trade-off in my opinion. If you're already this deep at 8 and 4, 7 and 5 is even better. And then at 6 Sorcerer 6 Bard, you gain a Bard subclass feature, but you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells and slots. So this, really comes down to what you're gaining. If you're playing like College of Valor, College of Swords, you pick up extra attack here. This is great in my opinion. And also, Sorcerer has that nice division for, 6 sorcery points. Quicken Spell costs 3. That still gives you 2 perfect casts of that before a long rest, so that's nice. So I think if you're going College of Valor or College of Swords, or even College of Lore, this is probably a good breakpoint in my opinion. So I think you're either going to go 9 and 3, or you're probably going to go 6 and 6 here. So next up for multiclassing is Cleric, and Clerics and Sorcerers don't mesh as well as Bards and Sorcerers do, because Clerics use Wisdom for their offensive spells, and for how many spells they have prepared. So there is some, a little bit less synergy there, but there are some good things to Clerics. Clerics give a lot of proficiencies and things like that just for taking 1 level, depending on which domain you choose. So there is like a good reason to take 1 level of Cleric in some cases. And obviously, if you're going primarily Sorcerer with just a few levels in Cleric, you're probably going to focus on Charisma and try and select spells that, don't really use your Wisdom, that aren't offensive, that are maybe defensive, like Bless and things like that. So if you go 11 Sorcerer, 1 Cleric, which I think is a good spot for a lot of builds, you gain Cleric level 1 spells, you gain domain spells of whatever domain you chose, so that might be some spells that aren't necessarily on the Cleric spell list, which could be good. You gain a subclass feature depending on which domain, and you also gain armor and weapon proficiencies from some of the domains. So if you took like War, for instance, you could gain martial weapon proficiency and heavy armor proficiency, which might be great for your Sorcerer to pick those up, depending. Maybe you don't need them, but maybe the heavy armor is just nice so that you can deck your, guy out and he doesn't die easily. And you lose a feat in exchange for that. I think that's a great trade most of the time. Sorcerers are pretty straightforward when it comes to their feats generally anyway, so you don't necessarily need 3 feats on a Sorcerer. And then at 10 Sorc, 2 Cleric, you gain Channel Divinity, which depends on the domain that you had, what it does, and you gain Turn Undead, but you lose a level 6 spell and spell slot, and a subclass feature. Depending on what your Channel Divinity is, this can be a good trade. Otherwise, it's kind of a wash. And then at 9 Sorc, 3 Cleric, you gain level 2 spells, and you gain the domain spells of whatever domain you selected in exchange for losing level 5 spell slot and cantrip and meta magic. And again, you don't really need that cantrip and meta magic, so this is probably a good trade in my opinion, unless you have like a level 5 spell that you really use a lot. Keep in mind again that 9 divides very evenly into 3. You get 3 casts of Quicken, or 3 uses of Quicken spell. So this would not necessarily be a bad spot to go if you're going Sorcerer Cleric. At 8 Sorc, 4 Cleric, you gain a feat and a Cleric cantrip, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and a level 4 spell slot. This is a tough trade in my opinion, because I think the level 5 spells are more valuable than a feat in most of the time. So if you're going Sorc Cleric, I wouldn't recommend stopping at 8 and 4. At 7 Sorc 5 Cleric, you gain Cleric level 3 spells, you gain more domain spells, you gain Destroy Undead, you lose a feat and a level 4 spell slot. This is better than 8 and 4. If you're going this deep into Sorc Cleric, 7 and 5 is better than 8 and 4, so go at least to 7 and 5. And then at 6 Sorc 6 Cleric, you gain a Cleric subclass feature and another Channel Divinity charge, and you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells. So, depending on what subclass feature you gain and what your Channel Divinity is, if it's really strong, this could be a really good spot, particularly, again, because 6 divides evenly by 3, so you can use Quicken Spell twice. So this is not a bad place depending on what you gain, but you'd have to have a really good idea how your build's going to plan out. Otherwise, I'd recommend just going 9 and 3. Up next, we have Druid Sorcerer Multiclassing, and this is another tough one just like Cleric because Druids use Wisdom for their spell casting, and also Circle of the Moon Druids focus predominantly on shape-shifting, and you can't cast spells while you're in wild shape. So there is not a lot of synergy with Circle of the Moon, and Circle of the Moon Druids get stronger in their wild shape form the more levels in Circle of the Moon they take. So if you're talking about multiclassing with Druid, you're probably looking at Circle of the Land or Circle of Spores. So the highest I would go here is probably 10 in Sorcerer, 2 in Druid, and that's because at level 2 of Druid, you're going to gain a Druid subclass, which is really beneficial to the Druid in my opinion. You'll gain level 1 spells, you'll also have Wild Shape, which you probably won't use, and you will lose a feat and a level 6 spell and slot, and you will also lose a subclass feature from Sorcerer. This isn't, again, a very important subclass feature most of the time in my opinion. So if you're talking about multiclassing, you probably want to go at least 10 and 2, otherwise I don't see any point in going Druid at all. Now at 9 Sorc 3 Druid, you gain Druid level 2 spells, and you gain some subclass spells depending on if you're Circle of the Land, you get to pick these. If you're Circle of Spores, you'll just gain, some spells. And you'll lose a level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and metamagic. I think this is a fair trade in my opinion. If you're playing a Druid, Sorcerer or Multiclass, you're probably doing it for spell selection, and you want to get far enough that you can gain some of those spells that you want. At 8 Sorc 4 Druid, you gain a feat and Druid cantrip. You also gain a new wild shape form, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and a level 4 spell slot. I don't think this is a good spot in my opinion. If you're going to go Sorc Druid, you're probably just dipping in a few levels like you did 9 and 3, where you probably want to go further. At 7 and 5, you gain Druid level 3 spells and Druid subclass spells, depending Circle of Land gets to pick them. Circle of Spores will have, ones that they gain. You'll gain Wild Strike, which affects being in wild shape, which really won't affect you much because you shouldn't be wild shaping much when you're multiclassing these two. But you'll lose a feat and a level 4 spell slot. I think this is better than 8 and 4 in my opinion. So if you're going to go, 8 and 4, you might as well go 7 and 5. At 6 Sorc 6 Druid, you gain a Druid subclass feature and a couple more wild shapes, but you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells. It depends on what you do here, but if you go Circle of Spores, I think Circle of Spores, I'd go at least 6 levels. You gain a lot of good things from Circle of Spores at their subclass features at this level. And it's, again, 6 divides evenly by 3, so you still have 2 uses of Quicken Spell if you want. A lot of people use that metamagic. It's not the only one you can use, obviously, but I think most people use that with their sorcery points. That's why I'm highlighting that. But I think if I was going to go Circle of Spores, I'd go 6 and 6. Otherwise, if I'm going Circle of the Land, probably go 7 and 5 or 9 and 3. Next, we come to Fighter Sorcerer Multiclass. This is actually a pretty good multiclass, in my opinion. First of all, if you take 1 level of Fighter, you gain a lot of proficiencies, not unlike Cleric, which is nice. And you lose a feat in order to gain this. And again, Sorcerers are pretty straightforward when it comes to their feats, so I think this is a fair trade. And then at 10 Sorc 2 Fighter, you gain Action Surge, allowing you to take another action on your turn. So theoretically, you could cast a spell, use Action Turn, cast another spell, and then use Quicken Spell to cast a 3rd spell with your bonus action. That's 3 spells on 1 turn. If you do this, that's pretty substantial. But you lose your level 6 spell, and you lose a subclass feature. That subclass feature, again, not super important. Level 6 spell, it's kind of up to you, but I think that's worth it, because you could start off a fight fling 3 spells, annihilate a bunch of enemies, put your team in a really good position after turn 1. Then at 9 Sorc 3 Fighter, you gain a Fighter subclass feature, you lose a level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and metamagic. I think this is a good trade-off most of the time, depending on what subclass you choose, because you pick up a lot from Fighter from that subclass, so there are a lot of good things you can gain here. And I think if I was going to go Sorc Fighter, you either going 10 and 2 or 9 and 3, I think either one of them could be fine, but I think 9 and 3 might be slightly better. At 8 Sorc 4 Fighter, you gain a feat, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and a level 4 spell slot. Again, I don't think this is worth it. If you're going to go 8 and 4 anyway, might as well go 7 and 5 to gain extra attack from Fighter and lose a level 4 spell slot and that feat. that would make you more of a hybrid build. And, you know, extra attack is one more level in fighter at this point. That extra attack is so valuable. So then at 6 sorcerer, 6 fighter, you gain a feat, so you'd have 3 feats still, and you'd lose level 4 sorcerer spells and slots. And I think this is a good spot in my opinion, particularly if you went like Eldritch Knight, because you'd actually have even more spell slots, because that spell slots of, you know, Eldritch Knight stack with that of sorcerer, so you'd have level 4 spell slots still, but you wouldn't be able to cast level 4 spells like a wizard, you know, could learn them from scrolls. Sorcerer can't. So they could upcast level 4 with level 4 spell slots, but they couldn't cast level 4 spells. This is a really good spot, in my opinion. If you want a proper hybrid build, then 6 and 6 is good here. Otherwise, I think I would just go 10 and 2 or 9 and 3. So Monk Sorcerer is a bit of an interesting multi-class, in my opinion, because monks don't really need wisdom. Like, they can use it for unarmored defense if they want, and they can use it if they're playing Way of the Four Elements for their Way of the Four Elements spells. But if they're not using those, and they really don't need wisdom, and they'd focus on either dexterity or strength or both of those, and that allows them to hybrid well with a sorcerer, not unlike a fighter or something, right? Like a fighter would go like strength, charisma, or something like that, and a monk would maybe go dexterity, charisma, or strength, charisma, or something like that as well. So it's not necessarily a bad multi-class, but you kind of have to work around. You probably wouldn't go Way of the Four Elements, for instance. At 11 Sorcerer, 1 Monk, you gain Ki, you gain Flurry of Blows, and you gain Unarmored Defense and Martial Arts, which, you know, allows you to use, like, Dexterity for weapons that don't normally use Dexterity for their attack rolls and damage rolls, etc., and you lose a feat. This isn't bad, in my opinion. You don't really need that feat on a Sorcerer. You can gain a few things here. The reality is, though, that, like, Flurry of Blows is probably not something you're going to use much on an 11 Sorcerer, 1 Monk, because you got to be point blank, and you probably don't want your Sorcerer point blank if you're going 11 levels. So there are some good things here, but I think you would probably need to go further into Monk to really benefit from them. At 10 Sorc 2 Monk, you gain another Ki, you gain Unarmored Movement, you gain Step of the Wind and Patient Defense. Step of the Wind and Patient Defense are a much better use of Ki for a predominant sorcerer than Flurry of Blows, because this can get them out of harm's way as a bonus action, or, you know, increase their defense as a bonus action, still allow them to cast a spell on the same turn, and it just, you know, prevents them from really being in a bad situation a lot of the time. They do lose a level 6 spell and slot and a subclass feature to gain this, but I think this is a much better spot than 11 and 1. Then at 9 and 3, you're going to gain another Ki, Deflect Missiles, which allows you to use your dexterity to, like, you know, pull a missile out of the air and to potentially fling it back, which is nice, especially if you have high dexterity on this build. It gives you increased unarmed damage, though I doubt you'll be doing a lot of unarmed attacks, and you will gain a Monk subclass, which is nice. In exchange, you lose level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and metamagic. This is a good trade, in my opinion. If you're gonna go Sorcerer Monk, you probably want to go at least 9 Sorcerer, 3 Monk. Then at 8 Sorc, 4 Monk, you gain more Ki, you gain Slow Fall, and you gain a feat, but you lose level 5 spells, and you lose a level 4 spell slot. Again, if you're gonna go 8 and 4, you might as well go down to 7 and 5 to pick up extra attack and stunning strike, and lose out on that feat. It's just a better trade. You also gain another Ki. So if you're going to go 8 and 4, go 7 and 5. At 6 and 6, you gain another Ki, you gain improved unarmored movement, you gain Ki empowered strikes, and you gain a subclass feature from a monk. Monks typically have good subclass features at level 6, so this is not a bad level, and you lose level 4 sorcerer spells and slots to do it, though. In my opinion, if you're going like a proper full hybrid sorcerer monk, you would go 6 and 6. If you just want a sorcerer that has some features of monk, go 9 and 3. Next up, we come to Paladin Sorcerer Multiclassing. This is another phenomenal multiclass, in my opinion. Just picking up a couple levels in Paladin can really change the power of this character. Paladins use spell slots for Divine Smites. Divine Smites are arguably one of the most effective class features in the game. And by giving that Paladin a lot more spell slots to use Divine Smites with and higher level spell slots, they can become extremely strong. And because you can still cast spells very effectively, because Paladins use Charisma as well, you don't have any conflict there, and you can still fling spells with you'd rather do that effectively as well. And you can sort of choose between doing a lot of melee damage on one turn or doing a lot of spell damage. So the highest I think you would probably go here is 10 Sorcerer, 2 Paladin, and this is because you're going to gain Lay on Hands, Divine Sense, Channel Oath, Divine Smite, importantly. Why go 1 level in Paladin when you go 2 and gain Divine Smite? You'll gain level 1 spells for Paladin, and you'll gain a fighting style. All those things are phenomenal. In exchange, you lose a feat and a level 6 spell and slot. This is worth it, hands down, in my opinion. This makes your character have the answer to basically anything you're facing. Like, if you need to melee a character with a Divine Smite, you can. If you need to throw a Fireball, you can, etc. There is just a lot of flexibility in that, and I highly recommend 10 and 2 minimally if you're going to go Sorc and Paladin. At 9 Sorc 3 Paladin, you gain Divine Health, you gain a subclass feature and subclass spells, and you lose level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and meta magic. This isn't terrible in my opinion. The biggest loss here is the spell slot, which you could use to cast a spell or Divine Smite, and what you're gaining from that subclass feature. Normally, I recommend going 9 and 3, but because Paladins can use that spell slot for Divine Smite, 10 and 2 might be just as good as 9 and 3 here, and it kind of depends on what build you're going for. At 8 Sorc 4 Paladin, you gain Lay on Hands, Charge, and a feat, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and slots and a level 4 spell slot. This isn't good, right? Because again, Paladins want to use Divine Smite, and losing spell slots to use Divine Smites with isn't good, so I don't recommend this. At 7 Sorc 5 Paladin, you gain Paladin level 2 spells, and you gain extra attack, but you lose a feat, and you lose a level 4 spell slot. I think this is a good trade, in my opinion. If you're trying to do like a full hybrid Paladin Sorc build, you're going to come down to at least at 7 and 5, and at 6 and 6, gain Aura Protection, arguably one of the best class features in the game, and you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells and slots to do it. So there is a trade-off there, but you minimally want to go 7 and 5. There's definitely a case for 6 and 6 if you're going for a proper hybrid build. Otherwise, you might just go 10 and 2 or 9 and 3. So next we come to Ranger Sorcerer Multiclassing, and this isn't that bad of a multiclass in my opinion. It might seem like it initially because Rangers use Wisdom for their spell casting, but a lot of Ranger spells are just like buffs and stuff like that, so you really don't need a lot of Wisdom on your Ranger typically if you're only selecting those spells. And if you're going predominantly Sorcerer, you'd probably do that, and you're just picking up some Ranger levels maybe for some skills or for a fighting style, or maybe you want to go down and getting extra attack or something like that. But either way, you'll predominantly, use Charisma for your spell casting and offensive spells, and you probably just ignore Wisdom altogether. So at 11 Sorcerer 1 Ranger, you gain a skill, you gain Favorite Enemy and Natural Explorer in exchange for losing a feat. These can also be skills, like they are skills in Favorite Enemies and Natural Explorer. So you could potentially gain 3 skills for losing a feat. Depending on how you're playing, how your party composition is, this could be a great pickup. Again, Sorcerers are pretty straightforward on their feats, so you may not need that extra feat. At 10 Sorcerer 2 Ranger, you gain a fighting style, you gain Ranger level 1 spells, but you lose a level 6 spell and slot and subclass feature from Sorcerer. I think if I was going to go Ranger, I would go at least 2 Ranger and probably 3 Ranger, or just dabble in it with 1. So I don't think 2 is a great spot to just like stop at. I think you're talking about either going 9 and 3 or just dabbling at 11 and 1 minimally. At 9 Sorc 3 Ranger, you gain a Ranger subclass. Subclasses for Ranger are very, very front-loaded. You're probably going to pick Hunter, or you're going to pick Gloomstalker here, because Beastmaster really needs lots of levels in Beastmaster, so don't recommend that. And both Hunter and Gloomstalker are front-loaded. Their best features are here at level 3. So in exchange, you're losing a level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and meta magic. This is a good trade, in my opinion. If you're going to go Sorc Ranger and just dabble a bit in Ranger, you probably minimally want to go 9 and 3 or 11 and 1. At 8 Sorc 4 Ranger, you gain a feat, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and slots and a level 4 spell slot. This isn't a good trade, in my opinion, most of the time, unless you have like a very specific build. At 7 Sorcerer and 5 Ranger, you're going to pick up that extra attack from Ranger, which makes just taking 1 more level worth it, in my opinion. And you're going to gain access to Ranger level 2 spells here, which is even more of a reason to do it. And you would lose a feat and a level 4 spell slot. That's a better trade-off. So if you want more of a proper hybrid build that, attacks and cast spells, 7 and 5 is a much better breakpoint than 8 and 4. And at 6 Sorc 6 Ranger, you gain another Favorite Enemy and Natural Explorer, but you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells and slots. I don't think it's a great trade, in my opinion. I would stick to 7 and 5 if you're going like, full hybrid, or just go 9 and 3 or 11 and 1. So then we come to Rogue Sorcerer Multiclass, and there's some decent synergy between these two classes, predominantly the Thief subclass. By gaining an extra bonus action, you could use that for Quicken Spell. So theoretically, you could cast a spell with your action and then cast 2 spells that are quickened with your bonus action. So you could throw 3 spells on one turn, and you could even do like a tri-multiclass where you go Sorcerer, Rogue, and then get Action Surge from Fighter. And you could potentially throw 4 spells in one turn with 2 actions and 2 bonus actions. So there is some good synergy here, and I think it's predominantly with Thief or Arcane Trickster in order to gain the spell slots from Arcane Trickster, so that you still have more spell slots while gaining some of the things that rogues give you. At 11 Sorc, 1 Rogue, you gain expertise and 2 skills, you gain a skill, and you gain some sneak attack damage in exchange for losing a feat. This is very situational, like what do you need expertise in? Maybe you want them in dialogue, maybe you're the face of your party and you want them in dialogue. This would be a good pickup for 1 level. The sneak attack damage, 1d6, isn't super beneficial if you're just casting spells every turn, so that's kind of wasted. So, you know, unless you're going like more of a hybrid character that's leaning into martial attacks and spell casting, then you're not really going to worry about sneak attack damage here. Then at 10 Sorc 2 Rogue, you gain Cunning Action in exchange for losing level 6 spell and slot and subclass feature. Don't think it's worth it, in my opinion. The level 6 spell and slaughter and the subclass feature, I think, are stronger than Cunning Action, so I wouldn't recommend going 10 and 2. But at 9 and 3, you gain your Rogue subclass and your sneak attack goes up in exchange for losing a level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and a meta magic. I think that's a great spot. Again, 9 divides evenly by 3, so you could do 3 quicken spells. If you took Thief, you could throw 3 spells in a turn. If you go Arcane Trickster, the spell slots stack with your Sorcerer spell slots, so you'll have more spell slots than if you multi-classed, you know, with a different subclass. You just won't have that extra bonus action. So there's a couple ways you could go there. Probably Arcane Trickster or Thief. Thief probably predominantly most of the time. At 8 Sorc 4 Rogue, you gain a feat, but you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and slot to the level 4 spell slot. I don't think that's worth it, in my opinion, and I wouldn't recommend 8 and 4. And then at 7 Sorcerer 5 Rogue, you gain Uncanny Dodge, and your sneak attack damage goes up, but you lose a feat and a level 4 spell slot. If you want to play like a hybrid Sorcerer Rogue, that one that like actually attacks and casts spells, this is probably where I would stop, because you're not going to gain any more sneak attack at 6 levels of Rogue, and you're going to lose level 4 Sorcerer spell slots at going down to level 6 of Sorcerer. So this would give you the option to get some decent sneak attack damage with a regular attack every turn, and still fling, you know, pretty deadly spells as well. I don't think it's the strongest, you know, proper hybrid multi-class you could do, but it's definitely probably the spot where it makes the most sense to, you know, gain decent damage out of your regular attacks that, you know, deal sneak attack damage and still be able to cast spells properly. I still think, though, that 9 and 3 is the best spot here. If you're just talking about what makes the most sense, 9 and 3 is good. So next we come to Sorcerer Warlock, multi-classing. And this is an interesting one because both of these classes use Charisma for their spell casting, but they have different spell slot types. So you can gain packed spell slots along with your regular spell slots, which could be nice. They also have Eldritch Blast, which is really great to add to your Sorcerer repertoire, having a very strong spell. And, you know, if you take a couple levels, it'll also, you know, use your Charisma modifier, which is nice. So there's some good synergy between these two classes. So at 10 Sorc 2 Warlock, which I think is the highest I would go, because you gain a lot at Warlock at level 2. I don't think I would take 1 level Warlock. You gain a subclass feature from picking Warlock. You gain 2 level 1 spell slots. You gain 2 Eldritch Invocations, which you'll usually use to make Eldritch Blast stronger and maybe give it knockback in exchange for losing a feat and a level 6 spell slot and a subclass feature. I think this is worth it, in my opinion, most of the time. Like, this, I think, is just stronger than probably 11 and 1 or 12, even 12 levels of Sorcerers most of the time. And then at 9 Sorc 3 Warlock, your packed spell slots, the 2 that you have, are going to become level 2 spells. You're going to get to pick level 2 spells, and you're going to gain a packed boon, which is great. You can make it so that your melee attacks use Charisma if you want to, you know, melee every now and then. You don't have to, but you could. You lose a level 5 spell slot, cantrip, and meta magic. I think this is worth it most of the time just for those level 2 spell slots more than anything. At 8 and 4, you gain a cantrip and a feat, and you lose Sorcerer level 5 spells and slots and a level 4 spell slot. I don't think this is a good breakpoint, in my opinion. In my opinion, you're either going 10 and 2, 9 and 3, or you're going all the way down to at least 7 and 5. But I don't think you would stop at 8 and 4. At 7 and 5, you gain level 3 spells for Warlock, and the spell slots for packed spells become level 3, which is fantastic. You do gain another Eldritch Invocation, and you gain Deep Impact. So if you did go Pact of the Blade, now you can attack twice if you're, you know, not playing in honor mode, if you're doing melee attacks, and you lose a feat and a level 4 spell slot. I think that's a great trade, in my opinion. As I've said, I think it's 10 and 2, 9 and 3, or 7 and 5. I think those are the best points. 6 and 6, you gain a Warlock subclass feature, but you lose level 4 Sorcerer spells and slots. I don't think that's a good trade, in my opinion. So again, 7 and 5, 10 and 2, or 9 and 3, I think are the spots that you would multi-class here. So then finally we come to Wizard Sorcerer Multiclassing. This is a strange multiclass, in my opinion, because these two spells casters use a lot of the same spells. Wizards have a bigger selection and they can prepare them, but sorcerers, you know, they have a smaller selection and they can't change them. So the benefit of adding Wizard here is that you can learn spells from a list. The more levels in Wizard you go, you can swap spells around, slot more spells, etc. But the problem is that Wizards use intelligence for their spell casting, and Sorcerers use charisma. So the crux of it is that, all these spells you might learn are going to need high intelligence, but you're probably going to have high charisma as a sorcerer. So you would then have to, limit the spells that you're using that you've learned from scrolls or that you selected as your wizard to, spells that don't really target enemies, like maybe buffs or stuff like that. Or you might have to use that Warped Headband of Intellect to give you better intelligence so that then you can cast them kind of effectively. So at 11 Sorcerer, 1 Wizard, you're going to gain level 1 spells from Wizard, and you're going to lose a feat. And you're also going to gain the ability to learn spells from scrolls. I think this is a fair trade. I think most of the time this is better than it's not, just because the amount of spells that you could use is going to increase significantly. Even like defensive spells, you'd have access to a lot more spells than a sorcerer would normally have. And then at 10 Sorcerer, 2 Wizard, you're going to gain a Wizard subclass feature in exchange for losing a level 6 spell. And this is probably an even trade depending on what you gain. For instance, if you pick like Evocation, and then your Evocation spells can't hurt friendlies, that might be a good pickup if you're like flinging fireballs all over the screen. But it really depends on like what you're picking up and what you're losing. At 9 Sorc 3 Wizard, you're going to gain Wizard level 2 spells. You'll gain an additional Arcane Recovery charge from Wizard, so you can replenish 2 level 1 spells or a level 2 spells. But you'll lose a cantrip and meta magic. This isn't that big a deal in my opinion. Probably the biggest loss here is 1 sorcery point, but if you're using Quicken Spell predominantly with your sorcery points, you still have a good point here. 9 divides evenly by 3 times. So you could go 9 and 3 as well. At 8 Sorcerer, 5 Wizard, you're basically losing another sorcery point to gain a cantrip, and you're going to gain a feat here as well. So this really comes down to like how valuable are you using, Quicken Spell 3 times, is 2 times fine with you to gain a feat or not. And I think that's probably a fair trade most of the time. The feat's probably better than that unless you find that you use Quicken Spell like all the time. And then at 7 Sorcerer, 5 Wizard, you're going to gain access to level 3 spells of Wizard and another Arcane Recovery charge in exchange for losing a feat. I don't think this is a good trade in my opinion, and I don't really recommend going any further in Sorcerer Wizard. There's just so much overlap between these classes. I think you're probably better off, just going 8 and 4 or 9 and 3, 10 and 2, or even 11 and 1. Any further than that, and you're just starting to basically remove spells that you can cast effectively with charisma, which kind of defeats the point of a sorcerer, and you'd probably just be better off going a wizard anyway. So I would definitely try and keep the wizard levels down as much as possible, and not go anywhere past 8 and 4. So that wraps up our multi-classing video for Sorcerer. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We have 5 more class videos to do. I'm trying to do one a week, in tandem with Elden Ring content. We do have Grand Blue Fantasy Relink coming up. You're going to see some more content for that on the channel. We also have some more previews for some games you may not have heard of or haven't heard about in a while coming up as well. What are your multi-classing tips for Sorcerer? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments below.